First time staying at the Encore, and it might be my favorite place to stay in Las Vegas, especially since it's got one of the nicest poker rooms. And in this one I'm playing 2-5 no limit with the straddle on most of the time. I buy in for 1200, and in this first hand I've got Queen 10 of spades in the big blind. The straddle is off, under the gun limps, and cutoff raises to 25. I opt to play this one aggressively and re-raise to 85. Only the cutoff calls, and we take a flop heads up, which comes King Jack 8 with 2 spades and a club, so I flop hard and c-bet 100. Cutoff calls, and 4th street comes a Queen of Hearts, giving me second pair. All options on the table, and I continue with the aggressive route and bet 275. Getting raised would kind of suck, and I don't expect a king to fold just yet, but there are weaker hands that I can get value from, namely Ace Jack, Jack 10, and other spade draws. Cutoff proceeds with a call, and the river comes the Jack of Diamonds, so I unfortunately don't get there, and betting doesn't seem ideal in this spot, so I check, and cutoff does not check, and bets 300. I like his sizing here since it looks like value, but I'm pretty much just beating flush draws and occasionally pocket 10s, and if you had those hands, they would generally benefit from a larger bet to get me to fold. So long story short, I give him credit and let this one go. I then add on for 800 and get 1 pip up with Queen Jack offsuit. The straddle is on from under the gun and I raise to 35 from the cutoff. Only the button calls and we go heads up to 8-6-3 rainbow, so not a lot going on for my hand, but I continue with a bet of 25, just hoping to take it down. That doesn't happen as button calls, and 4th street comes a 7 of diamonds. I decide to shut this one down and check, and button checks back. River comes a board pairing 3, and I don't think I can really rep anything strong here, so I check, button checks back, and he wins with pocket 10s. Shortly after, I pick up one of my favorite hands for obvious Asian reasons, pocket 8s. Under the gun 1 raises to 30, and I just flat from the big blind. We go heads up to the first 3 community cards, which comes King 3 deuce, all red. I check, and under the gun 1 c-bets 25. Not loving the feel of this hand thus far, but I call, and the turn comes a 9 of hearts. I check, and my opponent continues the aggression for 55. Although I have no history with this player, my sense is that she's got game based on the vibe that she was giving off. And thinking ahead, if I call here, I'll potentially face a difficult bluff catching spot to what I anticipate to be a reasonably large river bet. And I just don't want to be guessing this early on in the session, so while it's a bit nitty, I decide to fold. With the pocket pair not getting the job done, I then go back to playing big cards as I find Ace Jack offsuit on the button. The cutoff raises to 30, and my opponent is a familiar face from the San Francisco Bay Area. Shout out to Hassan, and while I am incentivized to 3-bet, I change it up and just flat. The flop comes King 7-6 rainbow, and I call cutoff c-bet of 25. 4th street comes a King of spades, and this time cutoff checks. With having decent showdown value and knowing that my opponent constructs hands in a manner that allows him to stay protected when he checks this turn, I decide to just check back. River comes a Queen of spades, and cutoff checks again. Just gonna take my showdown and check back. He announces 10 high, so I missed a bet on the turn for value / denial, but I break the seal and get chips pushed my way for the first time today. Next spot, I'm in the straddle with King 9 of clubs. Under the gun, small blind, and big blind call, and I raise it up to 60. Only under the gun calls, and we go heads up to Queen 9-8 with 2 spades and a diamond. On this wet board, I decide to check, and under the gun fires a bet of 50. Myriad of hands that he can have here, so I call to evaluate, and the turn comes another 8. I check again, and under the gun fires again for the same amount of 50, with 225 back. I am being laid an exceptionally good price to speculate, but I'll be honest that I don't have a great sense of where I'm at. I'm pretty much dead against hands like a Queen and Jack 10, and while I am ahead against flush draws, I succumb yet again to giving an unknown opponent credit and release my hand. My opponent was kind enough to show though, and he had 9-10 of spades, so I was ahead, and there was a request granted to rabbit hunt, and the river would have been the 5 of hearts. So I make a bad fold, and now I'm feeling like at least one of the earlier folds might have been bad as well. Hope this isn't a sign of worse things to come, but in the next shuffle, I pick up another suited hand, Jack 10 of hearts. There's a middle position raise to 30, and a hijack 3-bet to 100. Being in the big blind, I run the risk of getting squeezed by flatting, but that's what I opt for, and middle position ends up just calling. So playing roughly 1500 effective, I do get to see a flop, which comes 9-5-3 rainbow, so a complete whiff unfortunately, but surprisingly action checks through. 4th street comes a 10 of clubs, so I go from outhouse to a mini penthouse. I consider leading to get value from club and straight draws, but decide to check and give my opponents an opportunity to stab, to which they do not oblige. River rolls off a board pairing 5, and this time I bet 200 hoping for a crying call from ace high. That doesn't happen though as they both fold, but nice to take this one down. I then get dealt ace jack offsuit on the button. The straddle is off and hijack raises to 20. Unlike the last blackjack, I play this one aggressively and 3-bet to 75. Hijack calls, and we go heads up to ace 8-8 rainbow. I likely have a stranglehold on this one unless my opponent is a dead man holding ace 8, but he indicates that he's still alive through a check, and I check back. The turn comes a 9 of hearts, and after hijack checks again, I got a bet, but as I attempt to do so, he folds. Not too long after, I play the hand of the session, but I unfortunately missed the recording. Action starts off with me raising from the hijack to 35 with pocket jacks. Small blind calls, and then the straddler repops to 165. We're playing pretty deep at around 1800 effective, so I actually like a 4-bet looking back, but opted to just call, and that brought in the small blind as well. We go 3 ways to queen 9-7 with 2 spades and a heart, and after both players check to me, I check back. Force becomes an interesting card. It's the 8 of spades giving me a gut shot straight flush draw. Action checks to me once again, and this is where I potentially make another mistake in the hand by not betting as a semi-bluff. River comes a blank 3 of clubs, and this time small blind leads for 245. Straddler folds, and my read is that this is a value bet, and in trying to range my opponent who just flatted the initial raise and subsequent 3-bet from the small blind, it feels like he can have something like ace-queen, king-queen, or one of the 3 middle sets. Having jacks with a jack of spades is pretty key in this spot since I have removal to both the nut straight and flushes. All that in mind, I decided to turn my hand into a bluff and raise to 700. I fade the snap call, so that's good, and after a good minute or two of deliberation, he takes the chips he was shuffling and puts it in. I announce that he's got it, and he turns over pocket 7s for a set. So yeah, a bit of an egregious attempt on my part, and I had a chance to lightly discuss the hand with my opponent, and he just said that my story didn't make a whole lot of sense, and I have to agree with him. Too bad I didn't bet the turn to make the story a bit more convincing. Looking to shake that one off, I pick up ace-10 of diamonds from under the gun 1 and raise to 35. Straddler calls, and we go heads up to king 10-7 with 2 spades and a heart. Straddler check calls my c-bet of 35. The turn comes to ace of spades, improving me to 2 pair, but also completing both straight and flush draws. Straddler checks, and while I am losing to some hands, I don't want to just give a free card to a hand like king queen, king jack, jack 10. So I bet 100, and that puts an end to this one. Continuing with the trend of a rocky session, we then played a notable bomb pot. Apologies as I did not record it, but the gist is that I got shitted on when I got overflushed holding 9-3 of hearts versus jack 6 of hearts and ended up losing a roughly $800 pot. Back to normal poker, I then get out ace-king offsuit and raise to 35 from under the gun 1. Middle position and low jack call, both of which have pretty shallow stacks. We take a flop 3 ways, which comes ace-8 deuce, all red. Middle position makes some sort of an interesting exhalation, so I decide to check, and he takes the green light and bets 50. Low jack folds, and I put in the raise to 150. He then says, alright, I call in a pretty excitable manner, and slides all of his chips in thinking that I was raising him all in for his 275 total. Instead, the dealer corrects him that it's just a call, and we take a turn, which comes a queen of hearts. Putting the rest in here makes sense since he has 125 left, but I'm admittedly perplexed by his actions on the flop, so I check, and he surprisingly checks back. River comes another 8, so that should be a blank. I jam, and he pretty quickly folds. It's a bit of a weird one as I don't get the max against what was likely a diamond draw. I then pick up diamonds of my own in the form of ace-10. The straddle is off, under the gun limps, button raises to 20, and I 3-bet to 75 from the small blind. Big blind folds, under the gun calls with roughly 60 back, and the button calls as well. We go 3 ways to 5-5-3 rainbow, and a c-bet 75. Under the gun calls off for the aforementioned 60, and the button folds. We go to run a heads up, which comes to 7 of clubs, and the 4 of spades. So I'm unimproved, but I've got the best hand with ace high as under the gun mucks. The straddle is back on in this next one when I'm dealt red 3s in the cutoff. Low jack calls, I raise to 45, and only the straddler calls. We're about 1k effective going to a flop of queen 8-7 with 2 hearts and a diamond. Straddler decides to lead for 50, and while my hand is rarely going to improve, I'm a bit suspicious, so I call, and force 3 comes a 4 of clubs. Straddler decides to check this time, and I can't really take 3s to showdown in this board texture, so I fire 175 as a bluff. My opponent doesn't think too long and lets it go. A short while later, I pick up 3s again, this time the black variety. Hijack, who's the familiar face from San Francisco, raises to 30, and I put in a light 3-bet to 125 from the cutoff. Folds back to the hijack, and he 4-bets to 305. I could just fold, but there is some implied value along with the reasonable possibility that I'm ahead against Broadway holdings. That in mind, I put in the call, and we take a flop heads up, which comes 8-7-4, all black. Aside from flopping a set, This is about as good of a board as I can ask for. I would expect hijack to check at some frequency since this isn't necessarily the best board for the 4-better, and he knows that my favorite hand is 5-6. Nevertheless, he's undeterred as he puts out a c-bet of 320. All options on the table with folding probably being my least favorite even though I'm nearly dead against an overpair. Ripping would be fine as it would serve the purpose of denying against Broadway holdings, and calling seems reasonable as well to evaluate the next street. That's what I end up settling on, and looking for a card under 9 on the turn, it comes a Queen of Hearts, so not the ideal card. And after hijack weighs his options, he decides to jam for my 850 effective. Pretty crappy spot, as while I'm still ahead of ace king and clubs, the fact that he hasn't slowed down on this turn does have me concerned since I can feasibly have top set. Had the turn been a small card, I was leaning towards heroing off my stack, but after some tanking, I succumbed to the pressure and reluctantly fold. My opponent Hassan was nice enough to show ace queen for the goods. Credits him for the aggression, and even though I lost, this was a pretty fun thinking hand, but I'll have to get my opponent back in the future for causing the growth of a few stress-induced white hairs. Thanks, dude. I then upgrade to a better looking pocket pair with jacks in the small blind. The straddle is off, under the gun 1 raises to 20, and after cutoff calls, I squeeze to 105. Only the cutoff calls, and we go heads up to 10-9-7 rainbow. My opponent only has 250 left, so I get a bit tricky in check, and my opponent rips. I put in the call, and we go to a run out of a 5 and an 8, so I'm happy to make a straight. That is until my opponent turns over ace-jack for the chop. I'm a fan of BO having coined a new turn for jacks, but this one stinks. An orbit later, I find another pocket pair against the same opponent, this time 7s in the straddle. After small blind calls and big blind folds, I raise to 35. Small blind wants to play for more and re-raises to 110. I call, and we go to a flop that comes 9 high. Good flop for 7s, and after small blind jams for 225, I call, and the board runs out with a 9 and a 10. Small blind table is ace-jack again, and this time I find some run good to scoop this one. Last notable hand of the session, I pick up 9s in the big blind. Hijack raises to 30, cutoff calls, and I squeeze to 150. Both players call, and we go multi-way to a welcome sight of 9-4 deuce rainbow, giving me the nuts. Can mix here, but I opt to c-bet range for 150, and I shed one player as only the hijack calls. 4-3 comes to 8 of hearts, putting up a flush draw, but I still have the best hand possible. Once again, it's a spot where mixing seems fine, but I opt to stick with the aggressive route and bet 450 with about 900 back. My main target is of course a pocket pair and some floats that turn equity, and while I could have sized down a bit, I'd probably choose this size if I was barreling with a hand like ace-x, king-x, etc. Anyhow, my opponent does go into the tank for a bit and ultimately decides to fold. No additional value, but it's nice to win a couple hands to wrap up the session. Alright, just finished the session a short while ago, and actually about to head out for a show, and I caught Carlos Santana last night at the House of Blues at Mandalay Bay with my girlfriend Cindy.
You're all about to get down to the sounds of Carlos Santana.
Highly recommend that, really great experience. But as far as poker goes, I got in originally for 1200 today, and I tried to make that play with the pocket jacks hand, which failed miserably. I like the hand that I chose, but the execution was pretty poor. So story didn't add up, got called, and I ended up being in the game for a total of $3,000. At my worst point, I was stuck around 18 or 1900, and I did find a little bit of run good at the end though to salvage the session a bit, and ultimately cashed out 1,990. So still book a loss of 1,010, but definitely better than losing 1,900 at my worst point. So I'll take this loss in stride, try to pick up some good things that happened in the session, but a lot of things could have done a lot better. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this one. Just one last thing to wrap up this video. Fellow vlogger and friend Doug McCusker has been having a pretty tough start to 2022 with some health issues that has prevented him from vlogging and playing poker on a regular basis. He's documented that in his most recent vlog. So if you please do me a favor, just head over to his channel, drop him a like, a sub, a comment. I know he enjoys poker a lot, and I met him through this space, and I know all vloggers put in a lot of work to put out videos, and Doug is no different, and he's probably the nicest guy that I've met through this avenue. So just show some support, and yeah, with that, I'll see you in the next video.